Hey, everybody. It's so good to have you here. So good to have you back. For many of you, you were just watching the 7 o'clock show, and now we have our own little boutique experience, which I am just, this is what drives so much of my excitement for the future is in these little gatherings like this for the book club. And for tonight, we have the second session that we are about to begin with for The Robe by Lloyd C. Douglas, and we have our great friend Stephen Jonathan on with us tonight. And it's Stephen, I can't wait to talk to you about this. How have you been, and happy Easter.
Hey, happy Easter to you and everybody else, and been great. What a great time to read this book, and I'm so excited to be here too. And as you said, when this is over, we're going to be bummed.
Yeah, I'm gonna be really bummed. And let me just say before we do anything else, were you by any chance able to catch an airing of The Robe on television anywhere over Easter weekend? No, okay,
No,
because
did you catch it?
yeah, I watched it. I watched it once on Holy Saturday and once again on Easter Sunday. And I gotta say, on Holy Saturday, I'm sitting there, and here we're only like at this point 100 some odd pages into the book, and I'm watching it, and I'm saying to myself, I knew all I knew about this story prior to our reading together was the 1953 film. But I can now say definitively, even though we have only gotten through about a third of the book, whereas it is a cinema classic, it just doesn't hold a candle to this book. And I'm so confused as to why so many vital details were changed. It's baffling as to why the screenwriters thought it would be an improvement at all. Like, for example, Demetrius and Marcellus' relationship is not nearly as rich or affectionate, because in the movie, Demetrius is purchased right there at the beginning of the movie by Marcellus, and in a very, I don't know, confrontational kind of a way. It's weird. There's no history between the characters as rich as we have in the book. Other little things, and this is the last thing I'll say before we get into our review here. But at the end, when you and I and the audience left off in chapter 1, it was Palm Sunday. And we had that wonderful line with Demetrius where he's talking to another character, and the character's trying to glean from Demetrius what it was that he saw with Jesus on Palm Sunday. And he said, "Is he crazy?" He goes, "No, it's not crazy." "Is he a king?" "No." "What is he then?" He says, "I don't know, but it's something more important than a king." In the movie, he says, "I don't know," and then it just cuts scene. It's like, what? You left out the more important than a king? Like little things like that. Just, I don't understand. I don't understand that. But yeah. Anyway, that's just a little bit of me from over the weekend. So what do you think about this so far? I'll let you to riff a little bit, and then we'll get into the details.
Yeah, I'm with you. I saw the beginning of the movie a while back. I haven't seen the whole thing yet. I'm going to look forward to doing that after we read the whole book. But it's just true that there's no such thing as a movie that's better than the book unless the book is mediocre or not good. So I think it's just impossible. I don't know how long the movie is, but to capture this book in a few hours would be impossible. So I think they had to make tons and tons of cuts and sacrifices. And that's just the way it goes. But where we left off in chapter 4 last time, and this is where we're picking up this time, I wanted to draw us back to that very beginning, or that very middle of chapter 4, where they're interpreting the events that we know about from the Bible. And they're saying, oh, these Christians, they were in the Garden of Eden, and they got punished because they were inquisitive. And remember, Marcellus said, well, that's crazy, because in Rome, everything great we have is because of curiosity and inquisitiveness. And that brings up a really important difference between how we can see the city of Rome, which is like the city of man, and then the whole Genesis narrative as the city of God. Because curiosity, even in modern America, is held up as a very high thing, when in reality, Thomas Aquinas would tell us that it's better to study those things that would advance your soul towards truth, and to not be curious about things that we really have no need for. So I was really struck by that, and I couldn't mention that last week, but that's really where we begin. And you have in chapter 5, Demetrius really curious about Jesus and about or this stranger that he saw as lonely and mysterious and powerful and courageous and all these other amazing things. He's just utterly captivated, as we all ought to be. But he got to see him ride by on the donkey on Palm Sunday. So I'll leave it up there for now as we start to get into 5 through 8 today.
Oh, what great there. You know what, the phrase that came to mind when I was reading through a lot of Demetrius's digging into what he had seen and what he was feeling about it, because he had saw so little. But I said it was like an inarticulate kind of curiosity. He did not know why. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something, he was drawn to this whole thing. So we're in Jerusalem for Passover, and Marcellus is writing, at the same time, Marcellus is writing letters to home to Diana, being overly affectionate in ways that he would have never dreamed while he was back home. So I guess distance does make the heart grow fonder in that respect. But Demetrius, on the other hand, cannot stop thinking about the lonely man on the donkey. And even that description I thought was just so incredible, because he stayed with that loneliness description all the way up to the cross, because there he was abandoned. Where was his friends? And I love this description of what I would have to imagine were a description of the disciples. So that was very interesting. On page 80, he said, "It was so apparent that even the little group of men who had tried to keep the crowd from pressing too hard were disappointed. What it was that the noisy fanatics wanted him to do, it was the wrong thing. You can see that at a glance, it was a wonder that they couldn't see it themselves. Everyone there had urged him to lead a cause in which it was so obvious he had no interest. He was a lonely man, the eyes that hungered for an understanding friend. It was a loneliness that plainly said, you all could do something about this unhappy world if you would, but you won't." I've said so many times, Stephen, you read lines like this in this book, and I have to sit back and go, I have to digest it and then read it again and go, damn. That was, because there's a lot of romanticism as the years go on, especially me coming up even in Catholic schools. We did the Stations of the Cross, we all did this, but it became very romantic after a while. You don't to see Jesus as a troubled, lonely, scared person who's facing this gargantuan task and is having a very, very fully human experience at the same time while he's, fighting for salvation. It's really humbling. It truly is to read some of this stuff. I think Douglas does a very good job in bringing that new dimension to it all.
I do too. And one of the ancient symbols for Jesus is the fish. And you get this idea that Jesus coming into the world, the incarnate God, is like a fish out of water. And so he's so sad in this world, like he says, looking at our choices that we've made when we have free will. So that was really profound and a beautiful thing to contemplate. Very, very important.
And Demetrius is still hot for any information he can learn about the man Jesus that he saw a few days prior. And now it's Good Friday. And Demetrius, he learns from a Greek merchant, Xenos, I think his name is, or Polyglot. What's his, I think it was Xenos at the time.
Okay. Was it Xenos, Milos, or Poly?
I forget. But anyway, he learns from another Greek merchant that he was talking to that the Nazarene was arrested in the old park and the night before and was being tried for treason. And I don't know what it is about this book, but when I felt I was talking about this, it actually became a kind of an inspiration for a call-ins tonight for the 7:00 show. But when I read this book, I feel like I am walking the dusty ancient streets of Jerusalem during one of the most consequential weeks in human history. I mean, it was very nerve-wracking and exciting at all the same time that, here are little, people that are just pretty much background, and you start saying to yourself that everybody in this book, even if they're just background noise, they are existing in the same city as something so huge that is happening at the other end of it. And on page 87, I think it's on page 87 when he objects to treason. Here he is. Here's a guy. Here's Demetrius that doesn't know anything about this man Jesus. He saw the donkey. They made eyes for a moment. And when he hears that he was being charged with treason, he says, treason, but that's nonsense, exclaimed Demetrius hotly. That man doesn't want to upset the government. He doesn't want to have anything to do with government, neither this government nor any other. Treason? They're all crazy. He's speaking as if he's been following Jesus for years. He knew so much about him for this small little observation. It's incredible.
Yeah, don't you think there was something infused? Christ locks eyes with you, and something's infused into your soul. This is the gift of revelation, is that Christ himself, with a look, will infuse graces that can teach you what might take a human decades to learn. And I think that's what happened to Demetrius. He was immediately captivated in the right way.
Mm-hmm. And I think when around that time they were asking questions about like what could the treason be or what were the charges, and that's when we learned that hey, after the donkey ride, he went into the temple and he started throwing tables over. They talk about the money changers, and I said, oh man, I would have loved to have been around for that. He said, he was making a mess. And this guy Papigos, I think, he laughed at the whole idea of Jesus being charged with defiling the temple, because I think he said, quote, as if anyone could defile a temple that's been turned into a stable.
That's right. And Zeno's too. Zeno says they got to do something with him. He's going to ruin their business. This is just such a profound inversion of what the temple is. And it ought to remind us of what's going on today in the world.
Big time.
Okay. Yeah.
Big time. I mean, I think that's why it was so electric for me. And I think it has for a lot of other people, because I've been seeing the feedback, is that even though the writing it invokes a lot of emotion, and it gets you invested in actually being in the time and the place, and what would you do and how would you react to seeing all this stuff happen. It also at the same time is so much more, I don't know, illuminating, because there is that link to the present that is, I think the world is in worse off shape than before, and we're going to get around to that, because just the imagery, what the robe becomes a metaphor for, is terrific. And you know what? As a teacher, can you tell me why the robe is capitalized whenever it's referred to?
It's the robe. It's not a robe. It's the Messiah's robe. It's Christ's robe. So it has to be capitalized.
Okay.
It's like when you say he referring to Jesus Christ, you put capital H-E. Or when you talk about he referring to God, it's the he, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah. So the robe is so unique and specific and proper. It's a proper noun, the robe.
Well, talking about bearing witness, Marcellus and Demetrius, they are there for so many major happenings over the next couple of days. The sentencing of Jesus, Pontius Pilate giving the execution assignment to Marcellus and his men. Right. Then things are going to get real. I mean, my heart sank when Paulus and Marcellus, they're coming from wherever the hell the orders were being given, and Paulus tells Marcellus, "Have the drink," and they're just
to get drunk.
He's saying, "Listen, you're going what we're about to do is not the work for a sober man." That was so grim.
Yeah,
so grim.
So grim, yeah,
and
appropriate too. Think about it.
Yeah,
you do that work, and I wanted to comment to say, right in chapter 5, they really, I think Lloyd does a great job of showing how weak Pilate is politically. No matter what kind of man he is, he's been broken down, because you can only push the Jews so far, and he already made huge cultural mistakes. So even though the Jews could have canceled him, they kept him because he was weak for them. I think that's really important to consider. Not unlike our politicians today that have to be weak. They'll get canceled and replaced if they don't do the bidding of the mob, right?
What did you think about the crucifixion scene? All the talking, of course, the casting lots. How did that hit you?
What I really loved about it, the way Lloyd did this, is he gave little bits and snippets and pieces of everybody giving their perspective on this event. But this wasn't like subjective perspectivalism. It was the opposite. It was perspectives that all centered around the unifying theme of crucifying God who came into the world. So I thought that was really a significant inversion of modern day subjectivism, how everyone has their own truth. In this case, everyone gave their own perspective on what had happened. And you got bits and pieces of the gospel given through the eyes of all these different characters. And what was beautiful about them is that they all unified and they all added like puzzle pieces to the big picture. They weren't disparate. They were unified. So I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was really well done.
You know, and like I said before, prior to reading this, the only thing I knew about this plot was the movie. And I always thought, for the last couple of years of paying more and more attention to the movie, I always thought that it was really unique that you never see Jesus's face. You know, there's you can see him in the background. You can see him move a figure on the donkey. You can see somebody carrying the cross. You know, when they're at the foot of the cross, when they're casting lots for the robe, you see the crucified feet of a man. You understand what's going on, but it's the first time where this is just it pulls you away, and the camera in your mind just becomes a little bit more out of focus. And I thought that was just so interesting. It's like you said, it's a universal unifying piece of history that's going on there. But whereas that's the nucleus, we're kind of focusing on the electron cloud around the nucleus. You know, it's crazy. So they cast lots. Marcellus wins. But after the deed was done, after Jesus was dead, it's clear Marcellus is messed up.
Yeah.
He's drunk. He's traumatized. He's ashamed. And it's he's loose-lipped enough to even express his displeasure to Pontius Pilate that this execution was unnecessary and unjust. And Paulus and his men, they are drunker than ever at this point afterwards, and they tell Marcellus to put on the robe. And this is when Demetrius, who's already become so protective over this robe, he hesitates to give this precious relic over to Marcellus, who's only going to be putting this on to kind of placate this drunken rabble. And that is when Marcellus slaps Demetrius for the first time across the face and dons the robe, and is almost immediately brought down by the power of the robe. And then this mental distress just immediately deepens to unthinkable levels. At that point, after the slap across the face, Demetrius actually decides he's going to flee. He's actually going to flee for his freedom. But then a combination, Stephen, of compassion for Marcellus's condition and a letter that his commission is over makes him decide against it. What do you think about that up to that point?
Oh, that was one of my favorite parts. Are we jumping to chapter 7 or 8? I don't remember, but
yeah,
that was just an incredible light shining on a man's character who knows that his responsibility is to eternal things, not to temporary things. To consider rejecting manumission of slavery for the sake of a human soul that's suffering, that's Christ-like. And obviously he was infused with Christ's virtues, and he looked at Christ's virtues and says, I can't do this. I can't abandon Marcellus this way. So I thought that was incredible.
There's so many honorable. I'm glad you bring that up because, yeah, the refusing of the papers of manumission from Senator Gallio, he declines it because he wants to make sure, he wants to be assured that Marcellus is all right first. And you can see that Senator Gallio is just so taken by that. And there are so many honorable moments and rich interactions between characters in this book. Demetrius obviously shines among them all. Because he's coming from a place of servitude, and so for him to act that way, it's not like Marcellus coming up. Marcellus is an honorable man, you know, coming out of Rome. He hasn't been trial tested or anything like that, and you know he's young and he's kind of brash, but he has a good moral fabric from the get-go in this book. In the movie, he's a little bit more of a rebel. And they paint him differently, but in the book, he's, you know, there's a lot of this. I really enjoy the honorable moments here, and Demetrius you see that with a lot of people softening up. So his first exchange with Lucia is great too, because when they're back home, you can see that she's softening to him. Whether it's love or not, I don't know. But Demetrius is definitely winning trust and affection with people who were once owners and are now quickly turning into equals again. And
That's right.
yeah, I know. And his love for Marcellus is, you can call it duty, you can call it love, but on page 122, I got to pull attention to this. He nails depression. Lloyd Douglas nails depression on page 122 when Lucia asks, she's concerned about Marcellus, and she asks Demetrius, she goes, but didn't he want to come home? Did he want to come home? And Demetrius says, your brother does not want anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, wow, if that is not depression, it's just like it's just a void.
Yeah.
There's just nothing. You feel the numbness. I said, wow. As someone who's felt depression a good deal, that was something else right there.
Yeah. Isn't that characteristic of depression as well?
Oh, yeah.
True. Yeah. And he came home just sickened. And I think that's the topic of these next few chapters anyway. Speaking of Demetrius, the way you've been talking about him, I really think he's a key symbolic character for all of us, because he was brought up in the lap of luxury. He was brought up aristocratic, lost everything, and became a slave. And in becoming a slave, what we learn about Demetrius is that you cannot take from him what is eternal. You cannot take from him what is his character and his soul. And I love that quote online on page 96. Demetrius thinks, and I quote, the world seemed unfit for a civilized man to live in. Every human institution was loaded with lies. The courts were corrupt. Justice was not to be had. All rulers, big and little, were purchasable. And even the temples were full of deceit. You could call the roll of all the supposed reliances that laid claim to people's respect and reverence, and there wasn't one of them that hadn't earned the bitter contempt of decent men.
Mm.
That line is just incredible, and really could be about us all if we come to recognize symbolically our slave status. And I think that's just genius from Lloyd, because it's just true.
We have that same piece highlighted. And I also highlighted two other things right below that in the next paragraph. That next question. Why should any man think it pleasant or noble to give up his life to save the world? Obviously, at that point, he wasn't even thinking. He was curious, and he was drawn to Jesus, the Galilean that he saw get crucified and treated so unjustly. But he had no concept of what that crucifixion meant at that point. So here he is thinking about, how foolish it is for anybody, not knowing that that's exactly what Jesus just did. Right. And then over here, here was the foolhardy Galilean, so thoroughly enraged over the pollution of holy place that he had impulsively made an ineffective little gesture of protest. Doubtless, 19 out of every 20 men in this barren, beaten, beggared land would inwardly applaud this poor man's reckless courage, but when it came to the test, these downtrodden, poverty-cursed nobodies would let this Jesus stand alone, without one friend, before the official representatives of a crooked temple and a crooked empire. So he's just becoming so, he's fighting a lot of thoughts in his head, and he's putting things together, and he's getting there. But
how different is that from every age we know of, including this one?
Yeah.
Right. And we judge by appearances. If you look at, we might say, if we were there to witness Christ's crucifixion, we would say no one's with him. And yet today, there are over 1 billion Christians. The world is with him. And that's something you can't see with your material eyes. That's something the faithful apostles would have known by infused grace, especially once the Holy Spirit came down upon them. But Jesus said, don't judge by appearances, judge right judgment. And you see that Demetrius is judging some right judgment here, and that's because of the interaction he had with Christ.
And a big part of that interaction now is his possession of the robe. And
Right.
And I love this when we start talking about the robe here at the end of chapter 7. Pretty amazing ending right there too. He goes on to say, let me see here. When I touch this robe, it does something to me. If I am tired, it rests me. If I am dejected, it revives my spirits. If I'm rebellious over my slavery, it reconciles me. Because essentially the robe has now become a metaphor for wrapping yourself up in faith in Christ, if faith in that, and also to give yourself over and to rest in that suffering, that steadfastness in front of even to just the most lonely level of brutality there could have been. And it ends by summing up the feelings that he gets from the robe as being a peace, a confidence, and I think that the quote was the need to not worry, for everything will come out all right. And Stephen, when I saw that line right there, I wrote it in the book here too. I said, this right there, this at the last words of chapter 7, it's everything the world lacks and desperately needs, and even more so today with how increasingly tumultuous it's all getting. But peace, confidence, and the need not to worry, for everything will come out all right. If I could sign me up to have a rush of that, a wave of that rush over me every day. Sign me up. That
can be yours. That can be yours. I had a comment on this too. I thought this was such a brilliant, I'm not sure I marked the page properly, but in chapter 7, what Demetrius is comparing here is superstition to the supernatural. So I think in this age, it's really important to really ponder this deeply, because we live in such a materialistic age that we are naturalistically superstitious. And we miss the relationship between superstition and what is actually natural. But Demetrius said this, he goes, it's not the robe. Anybody who thinks that an inanimate object can confer these powers or be haunted or all these things, that's just superstition. And that's a person who's let their emotions run away with them. So he said, he didn't say it, but he implied that it's the symbolism of this robe unified to this courageous man. And it's the courage of Christ coming through the symbolism of the robe and into the soul of Demetrius and anyone else who touches it, that the determining power is from the soul of Christ, not from the robe itself. So you said metaphor, that's excellent, but it's also a symbol, and symbol means to unify with. But it's not the robe itself, because that would be superstitious. And in this case, it's not just natural because human souls make things happen. It's supernatural because it's Christ's soul that makes it happen. I just want to make that point.
And you know what? Now that you bring it up, in the chapters here, I think more than once, Demetrius proclaims, "I'm not a superstitious man."
Yep.
So this is so what I'm feeling right now, what I'm trying to articulate about what's happening to me is not born from my natural inclination to assign this to some kind of a fluke or some kind of a, magic pendant or something like that. It's that goes hand in hand with that right there for sure.
That's right. So important to get. I think today we're super superstitious. Modern people say that religion is superstitious. And that alone is superstitious, because religion is not superstitious. It's only superstitious if you make an idol out of it. So idolatry is super superstitious.
Yeah.
But true religion is not only not superstitious, it's natural and supernatural. It's both of those things that we really ought to embrace.
And I think that sets us up with chapter 8, which is really, it's just a retreat to, is it Crete?
Yeah, Athens, right? I think they went to Athens.
Okay, so they're in Greece, and Marcellus is just still in a state of emotional shock. He's traumatized, and Demetrius is hiding his knives. He's watching over him. He really thinks that he's going to try to take his life. And then finally, after he's confiding in some people who want to know what's wrong with the Roman visitor and all that stuff, who's out of his mind, and he decides, Demetrius, to bring the robe to Marcellus. And whereas he reacts very poorly at first, it does eventually break the ice of depression. And at right now, just to, where we are right now, as we're staring at chapter 9 in the face, that's where we are. Marcellus has had a major turn, and I don't know where it goes from here, but that's, what do you think about the character arc direction in chapter 8?
Yeah, I think it's incredible, because right before he has this kind of positive reaction to the robe after all this harrowing drama. He literally sounds like he's going to kill himself. Remember he was talking to him about, Demetrius was telling him about Lucretius and saying that Lucretius says that, we should not worry about death. And he said, I agree. He goes, but what does he say of those who worry about life? He really sounded like he wanted to die. And that was despair, truly despair. And I think the reader and even some of the hints in the book say, hey, was it the robe? And we ought to notice that this character arc, as you called it, it's the change comes from the interior life of Marcellus, not from the robe itself. The robe is constant. This robe is the symbol of all perfected virtues. And the truth is, in the face of perfected virtue, if we were to face Christ ourselves, we would be crushed to the degree that we're vicious. We would be elated to the degree that we're virtuous. And that's just the reality of it. And so I implore all of us out there, especially myself, to cultivate virtue so that when we encounter the perfect virtue, we respond with joy rather than sorrow and despair.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's one way of putting it. Man, Stephen, these book club sessions are just reminding me that we need just to get together more often and just talk things out, because these are great. We got to get you on the show more often. We got to do that. Okay, so let's go to the thread now. Now we're going into what the readers are seeing. And of course, jump in whenever you hear something, you want to expand on something. Here we go. Jalen Wennings says, after finishing chapter 8 this afternoon, seeing that it was a beautiful 60-some-odd degrees day, I decided to take a dog for a walk and ponder what I had just read. We stopped at my mom's house, which is only a few houses down the street. She was going through some stuff, looking for a picture of my dad from his time in the Air Force during the Vietnam War, where he was standing next to a C-130. It was a favorite picture of his, and he always told us that he wanted a C-130 on his headstone. Mom had made the choice to immortalize that wish with this favorite photo, although we didn't find it today. While I was rummaging through shoeboxes and photo albums, I kept thinking about the scene in which Demetrius declines his freedom offered to him by Marcus. My quote, "My freedom, sir, would be worthless to me if I accepted it at the peril of Marcellus's recovery," end quote. He could have had his freedom. He could have had Lucia. I kept wondering about this. The scene even ends with Marcus bowing to Demetrius as a social equal. Then I remembered that he had already had a chance at freedom after he left the banquet, but chose to go back to look after his master, who had not only struck him, but told him to burn the robe. While after calling it a day on searching for Dad's photo, Mom told me it was getting cloudy out and it looked as if a storm was coming. So me and the dog decided to walk back home, and about halfway there, the rain cut loose. With my dog leading the way home in the pouring rain — she hates the rain and the storms — I felt invigorated. It was as if I had traveled back in time for a brief moment. Many times on this very street in my youth, I had to rush home to beat a storm in the early to mid-90s. Then it dawned on me again, not as an answer, but as a question: is true freedom purpose? So far, Demetrius has freely chose twice to remain a slave so that he could aid his master in a time of need. He has felt that it is to his purpose. He's already treated him as an equal by many. He's free to have his own thoughts and opinions. We find that he's freely admits to disobeying his master many times, but still he chooses to remain his slave, loyal to his master. It's all very similar to the church's teachings of sin. We disobey daily, but we are still faithful. We go against our master's wishes and can still choose freedom to leave, but still feel beholden to stay. This really made me think about my dog leading the way through the rain. I know the way, but my loyal companion felt the need to see me through. She could have taken off down toward the woods behind my property, never been seen again, living as free as a bird, but she chose the warmth of home in the dryness of her bed with treats and belly rubs.
Oh, that was beautiful, Jalen. My goodness.
I know.
Great meditation.
Truly great. I don't know what to add to that. There's nothing.
I'm so moved because that was obviously, we mentioned that was one of our favorite parts. And I love what she said about purpose. When you find your purpose in a real way through the church, we're called to the cross. It's a thing nobody wants. You need to suffer with Christ on the cross. You don't want it, but that's our purpose. And there's true freedom in that. And ironically, or paradoxically, they treat him as an equal. Even Theodosia was was, flirting with him, not knowing he was a slave and willing to traverse some boundaries. But I wanted to make a point on his disobedience. When Marcellus has told Demetrius to do things and he said, no, I'm not going to do them, the only reason he disobeyed was because he knew it was in the best interest of Marcellus, which is a completely kind of disobedience, opposite of the disobedience that we say, well, no, I really would rather do this, or I want to do this. It was never what he wanted. He didn't even want to be disobedient. So Jalen brought up so many amazing points. Well done.
Yes, really well done. Gal2 2021 says, let's see here. Thank you, Jalen. Your analogy of your dog servant heart reminds me that there are spiritual lessons in seemingly ordinary. My big takeaway from this section is the contrasting, but also similar journeys that Marcellus and Demetrius seem to be on to reach that same place of peace that they are both yearning for. The contrasts mostly come from their stations in life and also timing of their coming to a point of decision, of realization of what is true peace and where it will be found. Similarly, the similarity that really stands out for me is that they both had and have to go through a period of brokenness, spiritually, mentally, and physically. Demetrius, perhaps because of his Greek background, and JSF could explain this better than I, and his mastering of his emotions is further along. His encounter with Jesus was straightforward and profound at the same time, maybe in part because he had gone through the worst part of his brokenness before. Marcellus was traumatized by his encounter with Jesus and wants peace and release from his soul-shattering encounter. It seems that both will find the answer in Jesus. The author gives us deep insights to ponder. One that stood out for me was his description of what Demetrius saw as he approached the site of the crucifixion from page 97 to 98. Quote, after the last struggling group of mud hovels had been passed, the loathsome garbage-littered field lay before him. He was amazed to see how much pollution had been conveyed to this place, for the city's streets had not shown so huge a loss of filth. Very interesting wording, a loss of filth. Reminds me of the invitation to leave it all at the cross.
Beautiful.
Good job.
Beautiful. And not just that brokenness, but Jesus himself, the incarnate God. Remember the suffering in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he was so distraught that he sweat blood. This is a real phenomenon. He sweat drops of blood and asked, Father, if you can take this cup from me, take it. But if not, your will be done, not mine. So the freedom of embracing the cross is just, it's unfathomable. Whereas the constant temptation for us is to avoid the cross, to take the easy way. And we've been conditioned to think there's freedom in that when there's not. And I think Demetrius is a great guide. So Marcellus wasn't a bad guy. His encounter with Jesus and the robe followed him participating in the crucifixion. So that tremendous guilt is probably really warranted. I mean, I don't see how he could feel anything other than that. So beautifully stated.
You have nothing in this world or everything. You can be a slave or a senator's son. One has everything and the other has nothing, but both have the same struggle of spiritual emptiness in a broken and corrupt world. Beautiful. But somehow Demetrius and Marcellus are just being around this Messiah for a brief and short time knows something is special about this man, something more than special than any government or any king. What a great and timely read, Frank. Yeah.
Great comment. Great comment.
There you go.
If I could add that cigar, I mean, last time he said something really great too, but I think what really moves me about this whole thing is in terms of Christ communicating with these two very, very different guys is that Christ today, who made that great line about his face? You couldn't tell how old he was because he was timeless and eternal. Well, Christ will come to you the same way he came to Demetrius and infuse grace into your soul if you choose to prepare yourself for such an encounter. And I can tell you that's true. It happened to me 30 years ago, and it 180'd my entire life. 35 years ago, this happened, and I'm on an irrevocable path. So this touches me in that way too, because in a real way, I feel like Demetrius. Just want to throw that out there.
I would love to hear that story if you ever have time to tell it. That's something sure. I'd love to hear that story.
I'll tell it to you next time I'm on for sure if you ask.
Okay, well, I got to remember to ask because I want to know. So, I have to do that. Okay.
It's a
In,
miracle. Yeah.
in chapter 5, this is from Heather Peets. In chapter 5, the temple is described as full of calves and sheep and pigeons on page 87, and as a temple that has been turned into a stable on page 89. The word stable naturally conjures images of Christ's birth. The Son of God entered our world in the most humblest of ways, willing being born in a stable with lowly shepherds and worshippers. But the temple is the house of God, his house, the place where he should be acknowledged as God and King. Of course, Christ could not tolerate what had been made of his house. Another concept I noticed was that the human government will not save. Hold on. Another concept I noticed was that the human government will not save. Douglas writes, quote, I feel like I left a word out of that sentence. I don't know. Quote, the world was in serious need of something, but it wasn't something a new king could furnish. Page 85. There is only one King, Christ, who can bring what this world needs, and one day he will reign on earth. Zechariah 14. So, yeah. Obviously, anytime you hear stable, I think of Christmas. It doesn't matter. Just the way, being raised Catholic, all these Christmases, all these anytime I hear stable, it could be in the most scientific, mundane sense. Somewhere there's going to be a Christmas thought. So naturally, I did have that imagery flash in my mind while we're reading that too. But I think that flip flopping is really interesting. How his first home was a stable, but here he is, upending a de facto stable in what he believes his true home is. That is the temple. This for a house of God.
That's right.
So it's that is an interesting flip flop.
Well, yeah, but think about the two greatest possible contrasting things are, first of all, the house of God, which is unimaginable, inconceivable, as the perfect, it's heaven, the house of God. And then the lowest thing on planet Earth is a house for animals, the lowest possible domestic thing you could do. So there really is that contrast. And the perfect God coming into the world under this lowest of circumstances would definitely not mean that we should turn his house, his glorious house, which is the church, the front porch of heaven itself. We should never degrade that by turning that into a stable, which really is what happened. So it's a wonderful contrast.
Yes. Let's see here. Crude IT Guy gave a little bit about the movie versus the book. IT Guy, I'm going to keep that to the side just until we get further down. Maybe I think the biggest differences between the book and the movie would be a great mini segment to do in our last session on this. So if you can, IT Guy, copy and paste everything that you have in there into a side note. Like, make a note on your computer desktop or something like that, and add to that as time goes on, we finish the book, because I would love to actually do a side-by-side comparison at the end. Mark G says, Demetrius' character is so damn solid. His rejection of freedom on the two occasions, as Jalen Weddings also pointed out, says so much. He is at this point an atheist with impeccable morals and great sense of honor. The only thing that he is truly missing is faith in God. His encounter with Jesus appears to be setting him up to grasp this final and most important piece of the puzzle. Now he will have his master and a good friend Marcellus to embark on this journey with. There are so many great people we all know in life that are missing this one piece. It doesn't take away from the wonderful people that they are, but that faith can do so much to them, an inner strength, feeling of calm, which the Robe gives to Demetrius and now Marcellus. That's a great point. And I thought about that yesterday in just the stops that we made, and just seeing the good people in my life who I can tell are just working so hard to resist giving themselves over to something other than what is just physical and what is material. Obviously, everybody could embrace the material aspects of these religious holidays. Easter has always been a very festive, fresh, springtime, yellow and purple, very fresh feeling that you can put yourself in. But is it real? What is it? Is it just a purple and yellow chicks popping out of half-cracked chicken eggs. Like, what is that? What is Easter? Is that really all it is? Is it all Fred Astaire and Judy Garland? Is that really, So I often think about that because I'm on a path I never thought I'd be on a couple of years ago. And now I find myself silently praying and wishing the same for others around me.
That's a story I want to hear soon, Frank. We have to talk about that. I didn't realize that until last time we started the Robe together, that you're on this journey. And whoever made that comment, I can't remember the name, but that's really, really important to consider. We live in a very dark time where even those of us that are pursuing the faith have been convinced to kind of invert the order of the natural and the supernatural. To subordinate the supernatural to the natural hollows out our faith, even if we have it. And God will give it to us. But it's surely true that most people are bereft of faith because we've been convinced to invert the order of reality, to put our own experience as the highest thing rather than what actually is. Reality ought to be the arbiter of truth, but we've been convinced that we ourselves are the arbiter. And there's no greater way to kill true faith than to find yourself the arbiter of truth.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and of course, that when you want to talk about what presents a challenge for the characters in this book, and then of course what presents the greatest challenges for us in modern day is the whole concept of having and finding and expressing your personal truth. That is something that is encouraged and pushed onto people as young as kindergarten up until you're accepting your Grammy award. And you have one message to tell the world, and it's all about your truth and honoring yourself. And it's just, what does that mean? That there's 7 billion versions of the truth? What is that? Is that actually possible? Perhaps there's 7 to 8 billion individual human experiences going on, and people are being, having all types of thoughts and whatever. But there has to be a little bit more or a little bit less than 8 billion truths out there.
There's like 7.9 billion less, 0.999. I wanted to just say a litmus test for this is if you ever go to a Bible study or you're ever getting catechesis and the question comes up, what do you think about that? That's a very, very bad sign. The right question is, like in the Bible, what reality is that pointing to? The question never should be, what do you think about that? Even though that's one of the questions they ask the most. I've been to 1,000 Bible studies, and that's a really good litmus test. If they're asking you, what do you think about that? The better question is, what's actually being said? What are the realities that are being pointed to? What is? That's the question.
Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time reading NJSF. Last week, we couldn't get into too much because we were running out of time. So I'm going to put him a little bit up front here, right, too. He says, because he's very, very, he's got a lot of great excerpts, and he puts a lot of time into these posts. He says, in chapter 5 and 6, Douglas expertly weaves the paths of the characters with the events of Holy Week and provides wonderful context to the political situation also. Number 1, the Manoah delegation sets up camp near Bethany, where the anointing of Jesus occurs. Number 2, Paulus describes the deference of Pilate to the Sanhedrin, later so crucial to the crucifixion. It says, well, go on then about the fountains, urged Marcellus, for the sight of the water had made him impatient for a bath. Pilate's wife was responsible for it. They had all been down in Crete for many years when Pontius had been the prefect. You can grow anything in Crete, and the lady was dismayed to find herself in such an arid country as Judea. She begged for gardens. Gardens must have water. To have that much water, there must be an aqueduct. Aqueducts are expensive. There are no appropriation to cover this item. So the new procurator helped himself to some funds from the temple treasury. It would have been better, I suppose, if Tiberius had transferred Pilate to another position. The Jews will never respect him, not if he stays here 1,000 years. He makes every effort to humor them, remembering what they can do to him if they wish, and he knows that the next time there is a riot, his term of office will expire. So I'm glad that he went and he grabbed that part there, because there is a little bit, and again, It's part of the beauty of this book with this historical fiction. You get really, really good, well pre-digested historical nuggets about what was going on out there and why someone like Pilate, who sees an innocent man that is going to that obviously the temple wants killed, why ultimately he just washed his hands of the whole thing. Because what is one guy versus having the entire region up in arms that he has to suppress a rebellion again, you know?
Right.
So it actually makes you see why the political dilemma for Pilate is why it was what it was.
Yeah. And to add salt in the wound, that very episode, instead of defending Jesus, knowing he's innocent, he literally allowed the Jews to trade him for Barabbas, which in the Hebrew means son of the father, believe it or not. But Barabbas is a lying, murdering, cheating scoundrel. And in the imagery of reality, the archetype is that Christ was traded for ourselves, but Pontius Pilate made that trade. He allowed for that to happen. He let a guilty man suffer, and an innocent man suffer, and a guilty man go free. And that's about the worst thing you could do as someone who's responsible for society. It's very bad.
And it's also, it goes back to what you had pointed out before about the what was it? It was the line about how this would put them that Jesus really upset the business. He upset the business that was established. That the temple heads would be fine with a violent criminal revolutionary type to be out on the loose again than to have this peaceful man who made their lives harder. Who actually broke people away from the dependence of the hypocrisy at the highest levels of government and at the established church over there, the temple over there. That trade was something they were willing to make their business a little bit more secure in its standing again.
That's right. And we're reminded from the Bible, what good is it to gain the entire world but lose your immortal soul?
Yes. Let's see here. Another scene. The scene of the summons of Manoah by Pilate and Paulus advising that they get inebriated. Yes. The other one, Demetrius watching the judgment and the crucifixion from the outside, witnessing Marcellus' role, allowing him to understand what later Marcellus would feel. Demetrius' characterization of Jesus as lonely was quite touching to me. Of course, Demetrius really had no way of knowing how uniquely different Jesus was, and thus how there could be really no friendship, really not a friendship as in of peers, but the way most understand it, which was allowed for the shared understanding. Here's what I'll say, and I'm interested to see what happens in the following chapters. There is something that we keep coming up with. The way that Demetrius kind of understood Jesus from a standpoint of he's only seen him on donkey back, for a couple of minutes. He's only observed him from afar. One glance that they had, that were their eyes locked. And there's just so much personal that he's accepted already. But again, like before, he's still in many ways, without faith, an atheistic man. And of course, Marcellus here at the end of chapter 8, he's just starting to break his hysteria apart. And now he is having a little bit more of I would have to imagine, a healthy curiosity as to who Jesus was and why this had such an effect on him. So from there, if I am an author, or if I'm judging what's going next, they have got to go back to Palestine. They have to find somebody who knew him personally to start asking the questions. So I'm wondering, how many apostles are they going to come across? How many other amazing biblical figures are we going to have them ask questions of and learn about? And what other challenges are coming along the way for these two main characters, as they came from different starting points in life, but it seems like they're all going to the same end. And that's what I wonder for the next reading.
I'm in the same boat with you, and I love the fact that we're both literally about to start chapter 9 for the first time. We haven't read this book, and it's such a joy to go through it. Normally, I would read the whole book and then dare to come here, but this is just great, and I love the prediction. I think it's excellent.
It's exciting. Okay, so then with that, because it's 9:57, and there's so much more even from NJSF. But I just want to shout a couple other people out who have great comments in here that we didn't get to. There's a wonderful one from Dyslexic Angel. You got to go check hers out in there. And then, well, we did Mark G. I think Dyslexic Angel is the only one that we missed. I don't know. But these forum threads are forever, ladies and gentlemen. Even if you are listening to this episode, if it's the year 2032 right now, and you are picking up the Robe and you are listening to this serial again with me and Steve and Jonathan, hopefully that forum thread is still up. Go and read, go and comment, go add your own. And here's what we're going to do for session 3. I think that we should go from the beginning of chapter 9 in my book, it's 153, chapter 9 to, let's see here, to page 236. So you're staring chapter 14 in the face.
Okay.
So chapter 9, that's 153 to page 236, chapter 9 to the end of chapter 13. And that's about 80 pages or so. I think that should get us on track.
Yeah.
And that's it. All right.
That's perfect.
So Stephen, and anything else you want to leave people with as we go into this third week together?
No, I'm just really excited about the quality of the comments, and I'm really enjoying this book, and this is such a great forum to do. I wish more people would do this exact kind of thing. It's a great way to recover literacy, and I'm heartened by all the intelligence behind these things. And thank you, Frank, for having me. This is so fun.
No problem. I have to imagine that somewhere down the line we're going to be doing another book together. This has been very, very smooth. But have yourself a great night. Send my best to your whole family, and happy Easter.
Same to all of you. Thank you. God bless you.
Take care. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So there goes Stephen Jonathan, and I can't thank you enough for being here. Let me go into the chat room, see how everybody's doing. Lark, I see you. Where is Demi? What's going on, Demi? I had the honor of meeting Demi in Myrtle Beach a couple of years ago. I know the hour flies by. I know. But we can't. It's one of those things where that's why I said let's just do a couple of extra weeks and keep the reading to somewhere around 75 pages a week, because when we have these bigger books, and I'm more inclined to do 100 pages a week, to talk about all the best parts of 100 pages of prose within an hour, it's hard. It really is. But I think that we did really well. I think we did very, very well. And the time also flies just because you're having so much fun. What's going on, Kate? Dyslexic Angel. Always great. Always great. Stephen Nelson, thank you. Lisa. Dwayne Thompson. Not shot. Oh, man. Let's see. Stephen and Lori, thank you so much. Sharon, NJSF, thank you so much, NJSF. I didn't read all of it, but read a good amount, and I hope everybody goes out and check it out. We're all Winston now. Black Orchid. Oh, there's so many more of you. I looked down and I saw over 70 people here at one point. That's tremendous to me. Tremendous. I can't wait until we have so much momentum built up that we have over 100 people watching live, and then however many more afterwards. I just got to say before I go, I really think that book club, whereas other shows do things like mug club and all that stuff, and that becomes the main way of really identifying the show's culture and to actually support the show and how to make it grow. This is really, I feel so good about this book club. Really do. And I think going forward, it's going to be a major driver in how it grows and expands and makes bigger impacts. Like Steven said, it helps people get literate again. So peace to you all. I will see you on Wednesday. But be on the lookout for all of your keep your YouTube notifications on tomorrow. Maybe I'll go live for coffee or go live from the back porch or something like that. It'll be a rainy day, but much love to you all. Thank you so much, and good night.